Hey, Richard Knudson here again, and in this presentation I want to talk to you about a really important new piece of functionality in Dynamics CRM 2011 that has to do with some enhancements to SQL Server reporting services reports. And the most important big win here in the new version is that we can now do custom reporting services reports for CRM Online as well as for on-premise. Now, Dynamics CRM on-premise has long used SQL Server Reporting Services reports for its primary way to do complex custom reports. And in Dynamics CRM 2011, we can still do that with on-premise. The traditional approach for that is to use SQL-based reports and to use filtered views. Those were available in CRM 4.0, and you can still take the same approach to authoring custom reports in Dynamics CRM 2011 on-premise as you could in Dynamics CRM 4.0 on-premise. But the big difference is for CRM Online. And the new piece of technology that enables us to do custom reporting services reports for Dynamics CRM 2011 Online is this Fetch XML. You need to use Fetch XML based reports to do custom SSRS reports for CRM 2011. Cannot do SQL-based reports for CRM 2011 Online. So what that means is there's a little bit of setup involved. So what I want to do here is walk you through how to create custom reports for Dynamics CRM 2011 Online, and first go through some of the setup, the most important setup issues to get you. So here's the scenario that I want to speak to. You've got Visual Studio 2008 installed locally, and you want to get set up to author custom SQL Server Reporting Services reports for Dynamics CRM Online 2011. Really two big steps that you need to do. The first one, and this is pretty much the same for on-premise as for online, but what you have to do is you have to install the Business Intelligence Development Studio, also known as BIDS, which is part of the fully licensed SQL Server 2008 R2 product. So this is what gives you the ability to create SSRS projects in Visual Studio. So you get the project templates, such as the report server project template. So you'll need to have the Business Intelligence Development Studio installed on top of Visual Studio to author any kind of SSRS reports. But again, this can be a little bit confusing because even though it runs on top of Visual Studio, it is part of SQL Server 2008, fully licensed product. There's no free download version of BIDS, and I'll show you what the install looks like in a minute. So you do have to install this one component of SQL Server that comes only with SQL Server in order to do this in the first place. So that's step number one. Step number two, this is what's specific to the new functionality for CRM Online. You got to install the Dynamics, and this has to be done in this order. You need to install BIDS first, then you'll install the Dynamics CRM 2011 Report Authoring extension, which is, unlike the SQL Server bit, this is a free download. This allows you to create custom Fetch XML report type. Again, these are the only kind that are supported for Dynamics CRM 2011 Online. Okay, so what I want to do now is let me just walk you through a couple of these steps just so you get a feel for the kinds of things you got to do to get set up. Here's the Business Intelligence Development Studio installation. Now remember, it runs on top of Visual Studio. This is going to give you your report authoring environment, but it's part of SQL Server 2008. It seems odd first time you do this that you have to do a SQL Server install, but what you're really doing is you're doing something called a feature installation. So you can see I've got that little feature option set selected up there. So when you do a feature installation, you're just going to select a specific feature, and here highlight the Business Intelligence Development Studio. So you're going to select that as you do the install, and it doesn't need to install all of SQL Server because this is your, say the scenario here is your development box is a laptop. You don't want to install full SQL Server perhaps on it. You can just install the Business Intelligence Development Studio, but Comes with the full SQL install. So bids needs to be installed in the machine you're going to do your development on, which is your Visual Studio box. And after you install bids, you're then going to need to install the CRM 2011 report authoring extension, and that's what allows authoring of fetch-based reports. This, unlike the bids development environment, is a free download, and it's going to look something like this. You can just search Bing for CRM 2011 report authoring extension, and you get to the downloads page, and it explains here pretty well what it does. It says Dynamic CRM 2011 report authoring extension is required to author custom fetch-based reports. So this is what gives you the ability to create the fetch-based reports, which are the only kind of reports that are supported for Dynamic CRM 2011 Online. So next, I'm going to take you through, on the assumption that you've gone through the process of installing Business Intelligence Development Studio and then installing the report authoring extension, how to create these custom SQL Server Reporting Services reports for CRM 2011 Online. Okay, so how do we author these Fetch XML based reports? There's a number of different ways you can do it, and I like to think of categorizing them in these three ways that I've got listed here. The first would be to download an existing report created in Dynamic CRM with the report wizard. You can download the RDL file and then import that into your Visual Studio project, edit that, and then upload the saved report into Dynamic CRM. Second approach is to create a new report and use Fetch XML from, say, an advanced find query as the report's query string. You can certainly create a new report from scratch and write the Fetch XML as well from scratch, but what I want to do is take the second approach here. So this is what I'm going to show you next. So to write a reporting services report, I'm going to start in Dynamic CRM, and I'm going to start with a big view of my opportunities data. And the scenario is I just want to download all of our opportunities, no matter what the status, won, lost, open, and then I can use the data set that will download. I'm going to download this as a Fetch XML file. I'll import that as the data set in the Visual Studio SSRS authoring environment, and then use the tools there to do things like filtering and sorting and select the fields that I want. So, and I'm going to click Advanced Find. And from within the Advanced Find view, I can download the Fetch XML. So this is the first step. So it'll download the Fetch XML.xml file. And I'll give it a better name. I'll use Fetch XML All Opportunities. And I'll overwrite the file I already had out there. And that's step one. In step two, and steps 3, 4, and 5 for that matter, I will be working in Visual Studio. So here I am in Visual Studio, and if I was starting from scratch, I might go to File, New, and create a new project in Visual Studio. And you can see here that I've got the Business Intelligence Development Studio installed. So I mentioned bids, that comes with SQL Server. That's what this gives us. And typically what I'll do when I'm starting from scratch is to create a report server project. But I've already got one of those, which I can effectively use as a kind of a bucket for all my SSRS reports for CRM. So rather than create a new project, I'll just use this one. So in my step 2, what I'll do is right click on reports and select add. And I'm going to add a new item. So this is the from scratch bit. And what I want to do here is be sure and select report, because what I want to do is create a new empty report. Notice it'll give it an RDL, that's the report definition language, that file extension. And I'm going to give this new report a name called Magenium Sales Forecast Dashboard. In a minute you'll see why I call it that. Then I'll click add, and we can see that it's selected in the Solution Explorer. So now we have a starting point for our report, but it's not connected to any data. So I'm going to do two things in succession. The first is to add the data source, and the second is to add the data set. So I'll right click on data sources, choose add data source, and I'll just accept the default name. And notice here the type, Microsoft Dynamics CRM Fetch. This is what we're given by the report authoring extension for Dynamics CRM 2011. So for Dynamics CRM Online, this is the only type of report that's supported. So we'll go ahead and use that. And then we need to enter the connection string, which is going to bind this report to the Dynamics CRM organization we point to. So what I'll do in the first part of the connection string, it's a two-part string. The first is always going to include the URL of the Dynamics CRM Online Web Service. So no matter what your organization is, you'll always point to this URL that you see right here for Dynamics CRM Online. Then we need to identify our organization. That is our unique Dynamics CRM organization. And we're going to do that by navigating to the organization, choose Customizations from Settings, then click on Developer Resources, and you can see your organization unique name right there. So I'll get that on the clipboard. Just enter that now as the second part of that connection string. Then I'll enter my credentials. This is going to be my Windows Live ID that lets me sign into Dynamics CRM Online, and in this case identifies me as a system administrator. So I'll go ahead and click OK. And it's worth noting, by the way, that those credentials are not stored in the RDL file. Now that I've got the data source, I've established the connection between this report and the CRM organization. Now we need to go add the data set. This is effectively the rows and the columns from CRM that are going to be used to populate this report. So I'll right click, choose Add Data Set, and we need to use an embedded data set. Shared data sets are not supported, so we're going to use a data set embedded in my report. We're going to point to the data source. That's that data source 1. And here's where we're going to use the advanced find fetch XML file that we downloaded. So I click Import. And even though the default filter is for RDL files, we can search for XML files, and here's the fetch XML file that I downloaded. So that's one of the things that fetch XML save as functionality will give us. So I'll go ahead and open that, and you can see right here, this is effectively the select statement, the fetch XML version of the select statement that goes up against my the columns of information for the opportunity entity that I've identified in that fetch XML file that I downloaded. So we can go ahead and do that. But I'm going to do one more thing. Remember, I named the report Magenium Sales Forecast Dashboard. Let's apply a filter here. So if I go into the Query Designer here, I can verify that I've got the connection string correct and that I've got the credentials entered properly, because I can see that the data, the query actually works. It returns data from Dynamics CRM Online. But what I want to do is filter this. Since this is for forecast information, let's filter opportunities to only show open opportunities. So I'm going to add a filter here, and I'm going to use state code equals open, and when we design the report, you'll see the results of this filter. Okay, now we're ready to start building our report, and I've started by making the design surface a little bit bigger, because what I'm going to do is drop a chart on here, and you'll start to appreciate the advantages of using the Visual Studio environment for these for authoring these SSRS reports, because I've got all these controls and I can simply drag a control from the toolbox, like a chart, onto the design surface. I'll select 3D column chart, and then I really got a lot of flexibility in terms of designing this. I'm going to make this a lot bigger. Go ahead and stretch that out a little bit and pull it down here, and I can start designing this. And what this is going to be is my revenue forecast, that is open opportunities by practice. So the first thing I'll do is right click on the chart title and give it a more appropriate name. So I'll call that revenue forecast by practice. And notice, once I start working with this, if I click on data or if I click on the legend over here, I'm going to get the chart data control. And this is where I can specify which of those series that we brought down from the advanced find query go in here. So in the values section, I'm going to choose to add value, and I want estimated value, but you need to get used to this a little bit, because the schema name of the field that you're familiar with from Dynamic CRM is estimated value, but we want for numeric fields, we want the field with the value appended onto the end there. So we want to choose estimated value. It's a little bit odd at first, takes getting used to, but you'll get a feel for that. So there's my estimated value, and now I want a category group here, and let's group this by practice. So my different practice areas, it's a custom field, mag_practice, and if I do that and do a quick preview, we can see that this is going to start to take shape here. So I've got a nice little 3D bar chart here of my revenue forecast by practice. And now I'll go back to design view and start dressing this up a little bit. Let's fix up the legend. Let's give this a better name. I'm going to right click on any of these data points in the series, choose series properties, and I'm going to go to the legend and give it custom legend text. So I'll call that forecast revenue. Now let's do something to improve the layout of the horizontal axis. So I select it, right click, horizontal axis properties. Let's give this a slightly bigger font. But what you'll discover if you go with the bigger font, you might want to rotate those a little bit. So let's disable autofit and give this a label rotation. If I give it a 45-degree angle, notice it goes from northwest to southeast there. And maybe that's not what I want, so let's give that a negative 45 degrees, and you can see what it does. It goes, then it switches it, goes from southwest to northeast, I should say. And maybe that's more along the lines of what I want. So we'll do that. And then I can do a few other things to dress this up a little bit. Maybe we want to add data labels. So let's put the estimated revenue in there as on the data label, and if I right click, let's format the series label properties, choose number, put those in currency, and use 1000 separator. Get a little bit better user experience there. And then we'll do the same thing for the y-axis. So I select the y-axis, choose vertical axis properties, select number, currency, 1000 separator, and maybe give it a better font, boost it up a little bit there. So now preview that, and we've got the makings of a pretty good looking chart here. Okay, so we've seen a lot of things so far that are not possible in the out-of-the-box Dynamics CRM 2011 report wizard. So that's one of the reasons to go to custom SSRS reports. Let me show you one final thing that you can't do in that scenario, and then I'll shed some light on why I called this report the Sales Forecast Dashboard. You can have multiple charts in the same report. So I've got this chart maybe to where I want it, and I can create another chart based on this one. I've got all the settings right, and maybe I just want to change the data by right-clicking and choosing copy, and I can copy and paste. So I've, to save a little time, cheated a little bit and already done this. So I've pasted it down here. So I've just made a slightly bigger design surface in Visual Studio, copied and pasted the chart. So now I've got another version of the chart down here, and all I need to do was to go over to the chart data pane and change the practice category to owner. So now I've got two charts showing similar data but categorized, grouped differently. I can preview. So this is another good example of something you can't do in the out-of-the-box report wizard. So you get two different views of the same underlying data. So now all we need to do is save this out, and then let's upload this into Dynamics CRM. So I'll switch to my production Dynamics CRM. We are in CRM Online, where we started. And now, go to Reports and click New. And now all I need to do is, rather than choosing the Report Wizard report, now I want an existing file report. And I'm going to browse out and find that RDL file. Here it is, the Magenium Sales Forecast Dashboard.rdl. Open it up, do a save and close, adds it to the list here, and now I can run it just like a normal report. So now the user experience is that it's simply a normal report, but it's obviously going to look a little bit different once we get there because it's got lots of capabilities that you can't do with the out of the box. So here's my so this kind of just shows you the basics. I wanted to show you how to set up for SSRS reports for Dynamics CRM 2011 Online. Then I wanted to show you some of the basics of report authoring. And remember, we didn't touch on some of the cooler stuff you can do with, show a little bit with charts, but we have matrix reports. We've got, of course, tabular reports, drill down, formatting, all kinds of different options with parameters and filters that we can go into more detail in future sessions. But then the last thing that we did was then uploaded this report into Dynamics CRM 2011 Online. So that's how you go about that. That's the basics of Dynamics CRM 2011 SQL Server Reporting Services Reports in CRM Online. So Richard Knudson signing off, and I hope you found that helpful.